You know, one of the things I'd like us to visit, because you're talking about mobilizing Nigerians, you know, to see this as a critical thing that everybody should get involved in. But it will seem now that we're so used to the instrument to get attention, which is strikes, that we've factored it in so that the Nigerian student is about to enter university and he's saying, well, my course is a 4-year course, but give or take, I most likely will be spending 5 to 6 years if ASUU goes on strike.
Yeah.
Or I might just be lucky and spend, say, a little about 4 years if I'm lucky in my own time. So it's not something that we begin to factor. We're so used to it, we're factoring it into our time spent in university. When people begin to get used to such an instrument, how effective is it in, you know, still getting attention?
Yeah, again, to solve the problem of this country would need the concerted effort of everybody, not just those in authority. If there's something that most Nigerians have, have a consensus on, it is that our political leadership has failed us in this country. And so I think I've always talked about the need for a thought force, and that is the people. We need to get the people engaged. We need to get them enlightened. We need to get them aware so that they realize that, look, governance, the essence of governance is the people. It originates from the people, and the destination of governance, any form of governance, is the people. And so once the people realize that there's a relationship between what they do every 4 years in this country, that is election, and their well-being, so they perhaps could realize that, look, it affects them. And that is the challenge for every single one of us, to let them know that if you say, well, I do not have a child in the university, then by maybe tomorrow you have a child in the university, or you will have somebody who has a child in the university. And if, we realize that, the children of the rich do not go to our schools, and that is why perhaps they allow this thing drag on for so long, then perhaps we will be much more meaningfully engaged. Yes, I would agree with you that by force of circumstance, we have gotten used to things that we should not get used to. Things that should be an aberration under normal circumstances. You cannot play with the education of a nation, But unfortunately, that is the reality that we are facing in this country. And we're doing our very best to tell the people that, look, we need to. It's like the issue of the fuel, the increase in the pump price of fuel. This thing, don't forget that this thing had gone on for like 15 years continuously. From 6 naira, 5 naira to 22 naira to 64 naira to 97 naira until what happened in January last year. And the government was taught a very decisive lesson that the people have been saying for too long that they cannot tolerate this. And the government continued until the people hit a mass everywhere all over the country in an unprecedented manner. And since then, even though the government, once in a while they talk about being broke, that they do not have money and so on, and there are those who will say, yes, but we can still tinker with the pump price of fuel. Of course, those people with wisdom will say, no, you dare not go there because of what happened in January. So if we can get on issues that are critical, that are fundamental to this country, to mobilize the people around core issues like the issue of education, I don't know how much of a priority other issues can be if education is not. Because the health care facility, a delivery system in this country depends on education. The rule of law depends on education, and so many other things. And so once we are able to achieve this, let Nigerians realize that they have a much more deeper stake in governance. And perhaps once they come to that realization and they know and they can constitute themselves as a force to make agitation for the proper funding of education in this country, then we might have solved the problem of education in Nigeria.
But don't you wonder sometimes, because I hear people say, look, they just don't understand how it is that government will set up a committee, they'll start meetings, they'll consult, go on with several negotiations, sign an agreement, and at the end of the day, you're not able to implement it. How does this happen?
No, you see, some of us will tell you, if you want to look deeper at what goes on in this country, for instance, if I have to tell you about governance in Nigeria, I might end up on a pessimistic note. I can tell you, and I have said it here in the studio one day, and I think it was my wife that took me up. She said, look, is there nothing good you see in government? I remember that conversation that day. It's not as if I do not want to see anything good in government. I want to see something good in government. And it's not as if when we criticize a governor or a president, we do that because we want them to to fail. I don't want them to fail. I don't want to keep on coming from studio to going from studio to studio because I'm talking about the problems of Nigeria. I want to face other responsibilities, other challenges that I have. And so when you have a government that begins to get its acts right, some of us will become irrelevant. What are we going to talk about? So that is my wish, for this country. But a situation where you have a system that is inherently corrupt, and we have always said this, that the Nigerian system is nurtured by corruption. It's as simple as that. Corruption, ineptitude, incompetence, lack of patriotism, lack of a sense of nationalism. All of these things, come in there. You have a situation where our senators and our House of rep members, where our ministers and perhaps presidents and so on, in spite of the deep poverty in this country, and let me tell you, forget the potentials of this country, but Nigeria is one of the poorest countries in Africa, even in West Africa. Look at it's one of the poorest countries in Africa, even in West Africa. In terms of per capita income, our country is not doing well, and yet our lawmakers, our government officials are among the highest earners in the world. That tells you that these people are impervious to everything we have talked about in this country. They are simply not concerned.
Well,
and that is what is alarming.
Chikakwe seems to say, look, this is a two-way street. He says, well, in as much as it is the responsibility of governments to fund universities, ASUU should also hold university management accountable on the use of funds, especially the internally generated revenue. How do they use money?
I would agree with you. In fact, I think there's supposed to be a committee that has been set up or recommended to be set up, if it's not been set up, in most of the universities in this country, that would also not just include the administrators of the university system or the tertiary institution system, but also the students' bodies are also supposed to be represented. And that brings us to another issue, that in most of the campuses in this country, the rights of the every student to form a union, to come together under a body and have their own leadership, has been abridged for so long. And so you need to begin to also do something about that, because that helps in the monitoring of how some of these internal generated revenue, for instance, that you're talking about, are being spent. The students must also be represented in that body.
But they don't allow the students even do any such thing. Some schools don't even allow students union in their schools, let alone come for meetings to the Senate.
I agree with you, and this is what if you look at some of the proposals with regards to this particular issue between the ASUU and the federal government, the ASUU has made it very, very clear in terms of having vibrant, and responsible, students' bodies in each of these universities, because it helps. It helps to have, to pull together, a concerted effort towards ensuring that even the university administrators also are put in check whenever monies are released to them. And, it is key, it is fundamental. I would agree with that.
All of this talk about ASUU strike, as Margaret rightly puts it, there's hardly anyone who hasn't had a taste of strike in the course of having a 4-year program. We go back and forth. I go back to the IGR, which is another issue here. They have their own subvention. They also generate their own monies. Have we been able to ask some of these administrators, in the name of vice chancellors, how well they've been able to use such in the demand, in enhancing some of the demands of ASUU? If you talk about structures and so many other things that you would think that the students would need to make your own school one of the best in the country, have they fared well in that regard?
One of the fundamentals of their demand has to do with university autonomy. And I think that, in having, the proper kind of university autonomy, where the university community, for instance, because it's a community. If you get into the university environment, the vice chancellor is like the governor of a state. It's a community. You have everything in the university community. I went to the university and you guys also did. And so when you have proper autonomy within, the university system, you find out that the university community, in terms of the academics and so on, will be involved also in choosing or electing their own vice chancellor, and will have some level of control over the vice chancellor, over the activities and the actions of the vice chancellor. It is much easier then to ensure that the activities of some of these administrators are streamlined and that they are closely monitored and supervised. And so these are some of the issues that this strike is all about.